They are America's first line of defense. Best of friends.
I'm the captain. Snap of the earth. Here we go.
Fierce competitors.
Very nicely done. Almost as good as me.
Ready to protect our nation against any threat.
Carrying the nukes. You love having the power of God at your fingertips.
Not tonight, buddy.
But what if the enemy is one of them?
This episode, joining me once again, filmmaker, critic, interviewer, host of the Hey You Made Your Movie show, Mr. Carl Diamond.
Thanks, Jared. It's good to be back.
Always a pleasure. 4th episode in a row.
Yeah, I'm getting comfortable.
On this episode, we are talking about Broken Arrow from 1996, directed by John Woo. Joining Carl and myself today, special guest here to infuse his love and knowledge of action maestro, auteur John Woo, filmmaker, critic, interviewer, reviewer, Mr. Robert Mitchell.
Hey guys, how's it going?
Going good, Rob.
I'm glad we've all connected here to combine our forces and talk about Broken Arrow.
When you brought up Broken Arrow, I was kind of like, I don't know. Broken Arrow, really? So I rewatched it, and I gotta say, goddamn, what a rush. I don't know what movie I watched before, but this was fantastic.
I've always loved this movie. It's one of my favorite 90s action movies. By comparison to John Woo's other Hollywood entries, there's much more full-throttle John Woo on display in his previous movie, Hard Target, which is his Hollywood debut, and then Face Off, I think, is the one that really caught on with audiences. But I've always loved Broken Arrow. It's still one of my favorite action movies. I think there's a lot of different elements as to why this is just such a fun movie. Rob, what's your experience with this movie?
I would have watched this movie when it came out. I don't recall watching it in the theater, but I'm pretty sure my buddies and I at the time would have rented it, and then we watched it, and we were really giddy just to see John Woo movies, him doing giant, big blockbuster American action movies. So we probably enjoyed it at the time when we first initially watched it, and it's been a long time since I revisited, so it was fun to watch it this morning in prep for this.
I've always been watching this movie throughout the years since it came out. Funny thing is when it came out, I had already seen Hard Target, but I just was not familiar with John Woo yet as a director. In Montreal at the time, in Quebec, Broken Arrow was like a 16+ hard R rating. Like, I used to go with my parents every weekend to see 1 or 2 movies, and they couldn't take me to this because of the R rating. And I remember just being visibly upset that I could not see this movie in theaters. A month later, I was in New York. I was just walking around with my mom. We had time to kill, and we saw Broken Arrow was playing. Yeah, it was just such a rewarding experience. It's hard to compare Broken Arrow to John Woo's homegrown output. There's kind of no comparison, just comparing the action sequences, because I do think Broken Arrow is a bit restrained for John Woo.
I would actually make a counterpoint to that. I will agree with you that Hard Target is probably his most John Woo-y American film. Maybe Face Off I haven't seen Face Off in a while, but there's just so many John Woo-isms in Hard Target that it's like, if you're not prepared for it, it's a bit of a, like, what is this? It's like a different language. But this one I feel like is probably the best balanced when it comes to Hollywood action movie language and John Woo action movie language. You still get a lot of John Woo stuff. You get the 2 different guns, jumping through the air, sliding across the floor, explosions. There wasn't a lot of slow motion. On initial watching, I was like, oh, this is nothing like John Woo. And then watching it today, I realized, oh yeah, there are the 2 guns. There is a knife to someone's face and a gun to someone else's face. That's very John Woo. So it's all there. It's just presented in a way where you might not notice it.
It's interesting you say that, because early on, you do get the slow motion shots. It's just the action doesn't really ramp up until they have Broken Arrow and that plane crashes. So you get a lot of those slow motion shots with them walking through the hangar or then walking into the plane. So I feel like it's sprinkled in there if we're just talking about the slow motion.
Is it slow motion or is it just the actors moving slowly? John Travolta's performance in the locker room is just like very slow and very calculated, almost like a 1950s greaser.
One thing I loved about that locker room scene was when he takes the drag off the cigarette for the first time, and that flourish, like no normal person smoking a cigarette that way. It made me think when he did that, I'm like, that's like a Nicolas Cage kind of thing.
You know why you didn't beat me today, Hal?
Could it be that you've been boxing for 20 years and you're better at it than I am?
No.
You don't have the will to win.
Your insight is shattering.
You had me today. You could have shut me down, but you blinked.
Yeah, well, we're only sparring, buddy.
Thinking like that is exactly why you lost. Now take this.
It's yours.
No. Take it. If you didn't give it everything you've got, then I don't want it. Go ahead.
You don't understand. You see, it really is yours. I took it out of your wallet while you were in the shower.
I think John Travolta is one of the main components that elevates this movie. Broken Arrow is part of the slew of films that John Travolta was writing on his comeback post Pulp Fiction. There's really like an energy of an actor who's back in full force.
One thing that's great about Broken Arrow, like in the Hollywood studio system, Broken Arrow was hugely successful at the box office. The critics panned it widely, but audience saw it in droves. So it leads right into Face Off. And then I thought it was cool that like John Woo and John Travolta already worked together and probably have developed a shorthand language by the time they roll into Face Off a year later.
Talk about an opening with the boxing match with Hans Zimmer's score. Christian Slater and Travolta have great chemistry, and that boxing ring match sets up their entire cat and mouse or budding enemies. It just sets up their entire dynamic in just a simple action sequence.
There's one scene I love where Christian Slater and Samantha Mathis working again after Pump Up the Volume. There's a scene where they're at a lake and they get split up. And then for a time, it's now Samantha Mathis's action movie, and she gets to be an action star in the movie.
That Pump Up the Volume chemistry between Samantha Mathis and Christian Slater, it's just so apparent from the time they meet on screen. I think they actually dated.
I saw that in the trivia, at least as far as the trivia of IMDb goes, they were a couple.
Just put it down, and I won't have to kill you.
This isn't a standoff. I've got the gun.
I never keep it loaded.
It said it wasn't loaded.
I lied.
I've always loved how she's not a pushover in this movie either.
She doesn't physically resemble like Ellen Ripley, but once she definitely holds her own, I think it's very believable.
That Pump Up the Volume to Broken Arrow, I had this image as I'm watching it today where I could make the logic where they went from driving around the high school in Arizona, right, broadcasting the pirate radio station. Several years later, he's in the Air Force. She's a park ranger. Now they're driving around the desert of Utah in a Humvee. So it was like I could extrapolate those characters and put them in this environment.
I never really think of a casting director's role when watching movies, but I was thinking about the casting director on this. Every actor in this movie is a familiar face practically. It's crazy.
This movie's got so many character actor staples. I was surprised to see Bob Gunton as the clandestine rich guy financing everything. He's like a serious movie actor.
The warden in Shawshank. You have Delroy Lindo, who's just all over the 90s. Frank Whaley, Brett in Pulp Fiction.
He's got the great line where they're like Broken Arrow, and he's like, I don't know what's scarier, losing a nuclear weapon or it happens so much there's a term for it.
And that was in the trailer. You have Daniel von Bargen, who is sadly passed. He was one of George's bosses on Seinfeld, The Faculty, so many other movies. Kurtwood Smith, Clarence from RoboCop. I'm sure the thinking was, look, these characters, especially the side characters, are what they are. Like, there's not much to them, but if you get one of these actors in the role, you buy that these are lived-in characters.
Yeah, because they're just these great character faces doing these roles. Obviously, huge props to the casting director, and I think a lot of people were like, John Woo's making a movie? Yeah, I want to be in this movie.
It's a very tight script. The characters might not be developed, but I don't think you really need developed characters in a movie like this. You just need basic action movie tropes, and it works.
Graham Yost wrote it, who's coming off of Speed.
I didn't know that it was written by the guy who wrote Speed. It makes sense. It's got that kinetic feel.
Definitely has that pace.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Speed starts with the shot of the police car practically airborne. And from that first frame, it's like, okay, the ride has begun. And with Broken Arrow, from the first frame, it's punch to the face. We're in this boxing match. The ride has begun. So it definitely has that stamp of Graham Yost.
Now, you see what happened there? Huh?
I'm pretty sure you hit me.
No, I give you left. You think I'm gonna give you another left, and I gave you a right.
Rob, when you saw Broken Arrow, were you already into John Woo's career?
Yeah, because we had watched The Killer in 1992 on VHS. My friends and I rented Reservoir Dogs and The Killer, and we watched them back to back. It was just like mind-blowing, like, wow, they just kick ass for vastly different reasons. The Killer was just jaw-dropping, so we were very much aware of John Woo. This was an era where you couldn't find these movies anywhere. So here's a crazy story. My friend got a catalog from a guy in New York City, and he was getting Hong Kong movies on Laserdisc or something and burning them to VHS tapes, and we spent $40 per tape to get these movies. Like, we saw Bullet in the Head that way and stuff like that. So yeah, there was a magic of that 90s era of hearing about John Woo films and then trying to find them. So we did not see, I don't recall seeing Broken Arrow in the theater, but I think we were heavily anticipating being able to watch it when it did come out on video.
It was the era of bringing those Hong Kong guys over to America and seeing what they could do with big budgets.
Van Damme was very instrumental in bringing John Woo over and a lot of Asian directors.
Yeah, no, that's great to give him props for that.
When that classic John Woo action starts, it's a sight to behold. Like, do you guys have a favorite action sequence in this movie?
One thing about the action is it keeps going and keeps going. It actually, for me, keeps getting better and better and better, because by the time they're on the train and Christian Slater and Samantha Mathis characters are trying to get to the nuclear warhead and John Travolta, that one part where the helicopter comes in and its blades cut a guy and he falls off the train, like the action in that sequence is just incredible.
That helicopter blade caught me off guard. I wasn't expecting it to cut him open.
Yeah, it goes there.
It's so gory.
Yeah, it goes there. It shows you the aftermath. So that action for me, like, there's action throughout, which is great. And I just love how it keeps building. Like, Broken Arrow is great, but that action sequence on the train is just fantastic.
Part of what's so great about it is that there's this almost rally of dominoes, like cause and effect, chain reaction of events. One action beat leads to something that affects the next action beat. If Christian Slater falls off the train, but then Travolta and his men are coming, so Slater grabs her and pulls her under. Now they're both under the train. It's not just throwing shit around. Like, they have a clear sense of the geography and then how every beat affects the next beat that comes after it.
I totally agree, and I think that's why this is like we can talk about like John Woo and what he's infusing and like his usual flourishes like doves or slow motion. But however, what you're describing being so methodical and well thought out, it definitely places it high in John Woo's filmography. The action works because it is so well done and thought out.
Yeah, it's almost like they planned the entire thing instead of just shooting clips of people hitting each other.
Yeah, totally.
His action is very operatic, so there's just this fluidity to it that I think is remarkable.
Everything feeds into itself. There's intent and a reverence for the rules of the world. The stakes are so clear and so high that you can't take your eyes off the screen.
I am quite fond of how the movie starts with this boxing match, and then that boxing match comes back inside the cockpit of the fucking plane. When he's switching the dials to release the nukes, they kind of revisit their boxing match. I love that bit. It's like the fight scene to me in the trailer in Kill Bill Volume 2. When you start doing an action scene in an enclosed space, it's commendable. It's like, okay, bonus points because you're making an action scene out of like a location or a setting that you wouldn't typically associate where an action scene starts right now, but it's happening.
It's the promise of what's to come. It's like, okay, this is just going to be a constant metaphorical boxing match between these two.
And Hans Zimmer's score, it infuses these religious undertones whenever you get a close-up of Travolta's villainous eyes. It adds this subtext of, like, Travolta being fucking Jesus Christ of bad guys.
The macro shots of guns in this movie are great. I don't know what it is about modern movies and like why they got rid of the long lens or the macro lens in action movies in favor for a medium or wide lens. Those shots, close-ups of the timer, the close-ups of the gun, the close-ups of people's facial expressions really keep you glued to the screen in a way that, like I said, I think it's been lost.
Enter. Come on, just push enter and it's done. Which is it gonna be?
Yeah, it's definitely like notes and like a sheet of music, and it ties together in a way that is lyrical and it works visually. One thing I think is great with the dynamic with Travolta and Christian Slater is they are competitors right from the beginning of the movie. They have this wager that's ongoing. I feel they still kind of respect one another, even though obviously Travolta's, for lack of a better term, going off the rails. And now Slater's trying to get these nuclear weapons back and, bring Travolta to some sort of justice. But they still are fierce competitors that respect one another throughout this whole thing.
Christian Slater wants to stop John Travolta. John Travolta wants to do his thing. And there's that line where it's like, I was going to ask you to join me, but I didn't because I knew you'd say yes.
Yeah, no, that's a great line. I agree. Again, a great job with Yost's screenwriting.
This line, I think, you could argue, has become pretty iconic. Pop culture website Ain't It Cool News comes from that line that Travolta has when Slater's like, "You're insane," and he goes, "Yeah, ain't it cool?"
I was wondering if that's where it came from.
That's where it comes from.
You're out of your mind.
Ain't it cool?
I'm serious, Deke. Your mind is taking a walk off the map.
I love how so many times in this movie, the timer of the nuclear warheads gets started. That just already just infuses so much tension into the movie. And then I love it starts at 30 minutes and then Travolta complains that, that's too long. It should have been 15 minutes. And then later on, he actually cuts it to like 13 minutes. And there's that humor with it as well.
Oh, yeah. And then 5 minutes at the end.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It keeps getting smaller as the movie progresses.
Travolta genuinely sells the fact that his character is insane. He's still got the Pulp Fiction cool and charisma and charm. It's everything that I think just makes a good villain in any genre of movie.
There's a piece of business where Travolta is messing around with the timer again on the nuclear device, and Howie Long looks at him, and now he's realizing he's been following a complete madman, and the look that he gives Travolta behind his back is just absolutely great.
It's the 5-minute timer he sets, and he's like, "What are you doing?"
And it's great because it takes that long for this character to finally wise up like, oh, I'm with a madman, and I'm going to die. The nuke flying through Travolta is a great way to, he's such a crazy villain in this movie. He has to have a fitting, crazy ending death scene as well.
He is such a lively character. He needs that oomph, right, to just go out. It has to be something like that nuke just flying through his fucking chest.
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about John Travolta and how great he is. And props to Christian Slater, who's got to hold his own in these scenes with him, and he does quite well. We buy him as this hero, and he's in these scenes with this very charismatic and great actor, Travolta, doing these really fun flourishes, and Slater is holding his own in these scenes with him.
John Woo definitely has a Western vibe in, you could say, all his movies. After they eject from the plane, we cut to Christian Slater waking up, and now it's morning and it's the desert. The cinematography really is very striking, and it did almost for a split second make me think that I was watching a Western. That sparse setting.
That scene right after the bomb goes off in the tunnels, we're following the butterflies over the water to where Christian Slater and Samantha Mathis are. It's like they got chased by bandits through a gold mine, if it were a Western. That Southwest desert, there's no other genre you can really think of.
For the most part, this film is being shot totally on location in Utah. Obviously, there's some set pieces that are built, like all the stuff in the mine, but a lot of the stuff is out there in the desert, and it looks incredible. You mentioned the butterflies earlier. That's that one little piece of business that's a John Woo thing to do.
Sure, animals.
Yeah, and have these two deer just sitting there after this nuke is now rumbling the earth underneath them.
I love the shot of when that nuke goes off and the ground, almost like tremors, erupts.
When the nuke gets detonated and Travolta turns off the ignition to the Humvee and the helicopter's over them and it crashes into the earth.
The EMP wave shutting down the helicopter.
Damn, what a rush!
Thinking of it, 90s movies specifically, there's some of the most amazing helicopter work in this movie. Most action movies get one helicopter crazy thing. This film has 4.
There's the gun shootout between Christian Slater and the helicopter. There's the radiation guys fighting Travolta. Then there is the helicopter fight between Travolta and Slater beside the train. And then there's the helicopter blowing up on the train. It's insane, considering that most movies only have one.
Not only to do it once, but to keep doing it.
I love when Christian Slater swings into the train and kicks the henchman through the other side.
In this movie, watching it again, you see all the action. How many times we saw American action movies around this time and it's like dark and it's raining and you don't see the fight scene and it's all cut up. There was one part where Samantha Mathis and Christian Slater are jumping. One of the numerous helicopter great set pieces. They're jumping and the helicopter's behind, like over top of them. It looks like that they're actually jumping with the helicopter fairly close to them and they're jumping into the sand. So you're seeing everything.
That's the scene, the tiny helicopter fight where he shoots out the guy and then the helicopter is crashing on top of her. The rear blade almost takes her out.
That's what also elevates this as a great John Woo movie is he's doing stuff with these helicopters that you would do with a knife or a gun. Now it's a full-on helicopter coming at you. And looking at stuff around this movie, there was a lot of talk about Hard Target and especially also Broken Arrow with a lot of studio notes and them trying to lessen the amount of violence and the impact.
Their boxing match on the train right at the end. I find it's just brutal when Travolta is like stepping on Christian Slater's bloodied and damaged shoulder and you just like, oh, I feel that.
I would love to see an uncut version of this.
That's why I like the train sequence because you're seeing a much more graphic thing happening at the end.
I just don't, like, even in the conversation of John Woo movies, Broken Arrow is just overshadowed. I don't think it comes up a lot.
Yeah, no, I totally agree that this is one of these films that are just kind of glossed over in the John Woo conversation.
On the escapism of it, it's a knockout. And then you add that it's done by an auteur. They don't make action movies like this anymore. I may have looked back at this as kind of like, oh, it's whatever action movie from the 90s, but you just go back and watch it, and it's so constantly entertaining, and it's so different than how movies are made today that it is a treasure.
As far as John Woo in this movie goes, revisiting it today and thinking about it in the context of his filmography, I think this movie actually ranks substantially higher than I would have thought like last week, not revisiting this movie and then having this conversation about it. Commercially, it was such a success and it led to Face Off because if this movie bombs, Face Off doesn't get made. The fact that the critics completely panned this movie, Leonard Maltin said, why was this movie even made? I wouldn't have actually thought about that. So I think revisiting it, Broken Arrow has to rank really high in John Woo's film career.
Yeah, I just keep coming back to this movie. I watch it at least once a year for all the reasons we've covered here. It's a classic, an action classic.
I'll contribute this to the ending of our conversation about Broken Arrow, if you'll bear with me. Outstanding, Hale. That's the spirit.
Broken Arrow, a John Woo film.
A side note, I don't know if this is going to end up in the podcast, but coming from Strange Days, like that we did last time, Jared, it's just, where Strange Days is it's a great film, but it's so complex and kind of down and depressing at times.
Oh, yeah.
While also being fun and beautiful and pure mood. This movie was so simple and so upbeat and such a, oh yeah, go for it movie. It was a nice change of pace.
Well, next episode is going to be Schindler's List.
Oh no.
Want to hit those peaks and valleys. Cut to explosions.